From all this, it stands out very sharply that we live in a grossly lopsided world. A world where a few dozen billionaires have as much wealth as the poorer half of humanity, and a small number of ruling classes in a small number of countries dominate, oppress, and control the destiny of the masses of humanity, with consequences that are already terrible and could, before long, become catastrophic. And in everything that I've been shining a light on regarding the world we live in under the domination of capitalism and imperialism, we are seeing the consequences of a system based on the private appropriation by competing centers of capital of wealth that is socially produced through networks of production involving vast numbers, ultimately billions of people all over the globe, who are forced now to work in conditions and relations of production that exploit and dehumanize them. It is not simply greed that drives these capitalists to constantly seek ways to more ruthlessly exploit people. It is the fact that if they do not do this, or if some other capitalists do it more successfully, that is, even more ruthlessly, then they will face the prospect of not just falling behind, but actually going under, eaten up by other capitalist sharks. It is the private appropriation of socially produced wealth and the anarchy, the feverish competition and contention that results from this, which ultimately underlies and drives all the horrors that are concentrated in the 5 stops and the conditions to which the masses of humanity are continually subjected. The solution is to replace this system of private appropriation with a system where the socially produced wealth is also socially appropriated by a government actually representing the masses of people instead of a class of capitalist exploiters. And this wealth is then utilized on the basis of conscious planning in the interests and for the benefit of the people of society and ultimately the whole world. How this can be done is spelled out in the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. This is the fundamental difference between the society and world we have with the system of capitalism and imperialism that we are forced to live under and the world we could have. The bridge between these two worlds is revolution, a real revolution. Let's be honest, this is a difficult road, but there is no other way to finally put an end to the horrors that are continually brought forth by this system. And as hard as this is, it is possible if we go about it the right way, with the right outlook and approach, the right goals and methods, the right strategy and plan. So this is what I'm going to dig into through the course of this talk. First, let's return to the crucial question of what revolution really means. At the very beginning of how we can win, this is made very clear. An actual revolution does not mean trying to make some changes within this system. It means overthrowing this system and bringing into being a radically different and far better system. Radical means getting to the root, digging up the old system by its roots and replacing it with a fundamentally different system. And what opens the way to doing this is shattering the rule of capitalism over society through defeating and dismantling its institutions, such as the police and armed forces, that violently enforce this system's rule, and then bringing into being new institutions that serve the radical transformation of society and ultimately the world as a whole. How this could be done is something I will speak to in the second part of this talk. Here I want to underline the point that this is completely different than just winning some reforms under this system. certain government concessions to the fight against injustice, for example, civil rights legislation, DACA, which granted temporary legal status to some immigrants brought here as children, or court decisions establishing the right to abortion and gay marriage. These were hard-fought victories. But the problem is that they are and can only be partial victories, dealing with only some aspects of oppression under this system, but not eliminating the oppression as a whole or the source of this oppression, which is the system itself. And as we are seeing, even where such partial victories are won, so long as this system remains in power, there will be powerful forces who will move to attack and undermine and seek to reverse even these partial gains. It is also very important to understand the difference between the possibility for certain individuals or even a certain section of the oppressed to improve their conditions or to make it under this system, and the reality that for the masses of oppressed people, the only way they can escape their conditions of oppression is by abolishing the system that maintains them in these conditions. Of course, the rulers of this system and their political operatives and media mouthpieces are forever pointing to the success stories of people who have risen from the ranks of the poor and oppressed to become rich and famous, or at least to realize the great American dream of becoming middle class. This is like going to a casino where by far most who play are played for suckers and sink deeper into a hole, while every time there is a winner, it is loudly celebrated, often with bells, sirens, and so on, to make people believe that if they just keep playing, they too can become winners. This touches on something of great importance: the relation between individuals and the larger society and world of which they are a part. Everyone, of course, exists as an individual. But at the same time, the larger society and world establishes the conditions within which individuals exist and function and shapes their outlook and values. Even the aspirations and the felt needs of individuals are shaped in this way. To cite a simple example, no one in 1970 felt that they needed to be on their cell phone continually, because cell phones did not yet exist. But once people have them, they have great difficulty doing without them, as we know. Here, a formulation by the founder of communism, Karl Marx, a formulation that has come to be known as the Four Alls, is very relevant. Marx wrote that the communist revolution requires and involves the abolition of all class distinctions among people, the abolition of all the production relations, the economic relations on which those class distinctions rest, the abolition of all the social relations that correspond to those production relations, and the revolutionizing of all the ideas that correspond to those social relations. Among other important insights that can be gained from what Marx is getting at here is the understanding that while, again, people exist as individuals, and their individuality is important and should be given due weight, overall it is the prevailing economic relations and the corresponding social relations and ideas that in a fundamental and overall sense shape individuals and individual aspirations. The divisions among people in a society like this, including the unequal and oppressive divisions between rich and poor, white and non-white, men and women, and so on, are real and objective. Democratic Party politicians keep saying things like, Trump is dividing us instead of uniting us. But these divisions are not caused by the divisiveness of someone like Trump. Trump makes use of these divisions in pursuit of his fascist agenda, but neither he nor anyone else has caused or could have caused these divisions. They are rooted in the very nature, functioning, and requirements of this system, in the way all this has historically evolved. To eliminate these divisions, it is necessary to eliminate this system. From everything that has been said so far, it should be clear why the fundamental change that is needed cannot be brought about by voting. Of course, those who care about and are determined to do something about oppression and injustice are constantly bombarded with the notion that it is crucial to vote for the Democrats because at least they sometimes say they care about this. And this has become all the more intense and insistent with the rise to power of the Trump-Pence fascist regime and its backing by the politicians of the Republican Party, which has itself become a fascist party at its core. It is crucial to vote for the Democrats, they tell us, in order to do something to limit the harm Trump can do. The leaders of the Democratic Party refuse to say that Trump should be removed from office now, and they insist that even talking about that only plays into Trump's hands. But because of the way the electoral system has been set up from the beginning of this country, with the Electoral College instead of direct popular election of the presidents, and small states having as many senators as states with much larger populations, all of which, by the way, was part of the compromise with the slave states, and which represents today the continuing legacy of slavery. And with the way elections for Congress have been manipulated through suppression of the votes of especially black people and Latinos, as well as the gerrymandering of districts, that is, structuring them in ways that are geographically distorted, so that people who would tend to vote against the Republicans are concentrated in a few voting districts, while those, especially conservative white people, who would vote Republican are spread out through a number of such districts, giving them a greater disproportionate number of congressional representatives. Because of all this, it is far from certain that in the upcoming midterm elections, the Democratic Party will be able to pull off its blue wave to regain a majority in Congress. And what is the approach of the Democrats in attempting to achieve this? To a large degree, it is to run candidates and campaigns they hope will appeal to Trump voters, including candidates who boast of their service in the U.S. military, carrying out bombing raids and other devastation in the Middle East and Afghanistan. The truth is that not only is it necessary to overthrow the system in order to put an end to what is concentrated in the 5 stops and the horrific conditions to which the masses of humanity are subjected in a world dominated by this system of capitalism and imperialism, but even short of revolution, even in order to prevent the Trump-Pence regime from further consolidating its rule and more fully implementing its fascist program, it is necessary to rely not on the Democratic Party, but on masses of people, breaking out of the confines of politics as usual and carrying out sustained nonviolent mass mobilization to drive out this fascist regime. In fact, a major role of the Democratic Party is corralling and domesticating dissent. For example, at the time of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, when there was a massive outpouring of opposition to that war, the Democratic Party as such was not in a position to co-opt and derail this dissent because, with some exceptions, Democrats in Congress voted for this war. So they utilized the organization Move On as a kind of oppositional force whose main role was to lure people who were alienated by the war and by the Democratic Party's support for the war back into politics as usual, back into the framework and confines that had produced that war in the first place. More recently, the Democratic Party and those aligned with it have done the same thing with regard to the anger and disgust that literally tens of millions feel toward Trump, And in some ways, the Democrats have actually positioned themselves to the right of Trump, especially in their insistence that the basic problem with Trump is that he is undermining America's dominant position in the world, when in reality the America First actions of the Trump-Pence regime are aimed at increasing that domination in ways that represent a grave threat to humanity. In case there were a need for further evidence of what the Democratic Party is really about, here are two other striking examples. At the Democratic Party convention in 2016, former CIA head Leon Panetta and Marine General John Allen, a former commander of U.S. troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, were featured speakers. And when some people at the convention responded by chanting, "No more war," they were met by attempts of the convention officials to silence them, and then they were drowned out by the mainstream of the Democratic Party delegates bellowing, "USA! USA! USA!" And it's just as ugly as that. And let's not forget that when black youth in Baltimore rose up in righteous rebellion after the police murdered Freddie Gray, Barack Obama denounced these youth as thugs, but he never denounced the police who killed Freddie Gray as murdering thugs. I could go on and on. There is more than a mountain of evidence that shows the actual nature and role of the Democratic Party as a major instrument of this monstrously oppressive system. But there is an even more basic problem. The truth is that the governing politicians, the owners and operatives of the multi-billion-dollar media of various kinds, and others who sit atop the major institutions of this society are the political and cultural representatives of this system. Just listen to them when they talk about the role of the U.S. empire in the world. It is our interests, our military, our allies, and on and on and on. And the deeper truth is that it would be impossible for them to be anything other than representatives and functionaries of this system. This is why even stubborn efforts by well-intentioned people to turn the Democratic Party into a positive force are bound to fail. Once again, we are back to the economic relations and the operation of the economic system, the social relations bound up with this, and how this determines the character of the political system and the dominant culture. If the political system operated in conflict with these underlying relations, the society could not function. For this fundamental reason, political parties which have a major role and influence in this society are and could only be ruling class parties, representatives of the ruling capitalist class, instruments of this system of ruthless oppression, administrators and enforcers of a worldwide empire of exploitation and plunder, responsible for massive destruction and devastation of countries and people, and posing a very real and growing threat to the very existence of humanity through environmental destruction or nuclear annihilation.